Hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about how I wrote Frejas Baby and Frejas Baby Shattered. So these two books go hand in hand, and the main reason for that is because these two books are essentially the same story but with different endings. What that means, a lot of times people get very confused when first picking up these books. They think one of them is a sequel, or how does this all go together? First and foremost, I wrote Frejas Baby first. This is very much a fluffy, happily ever after romance story. It is specifically a high school teenage pregnancy romance story. So our main characters, Freya and Alex, start going out and they have relations at the homecoming dance. And then that results in Freya getting pregnant. And the book is basically detailing the struggles of having to deal with all your normal, typical high school experiences. And then on top of that, also having to deal with becoming a teenage parent. The ending of the book does culminate with Freya having the baby. The follow-up, the actual sequel to Freja's Baby, is Learning to Walk, which is currently a work in progress. It is not yet finished or published, but that is the actual sequel to Freja's Baby. And that will be about them actually being teenage parents with the baby. Whereas Freja's Baby, for 90% of the book, Freya is pregnant. The baby is not yet its own entity yet. It's not born yet in this book. It's detailing this whole struggle of Freya having to hide her pregnancy at school so that she doesn't get bullied by the other kids at school, and she also has to hide it from her parents because her home situation isn't that great to begin with, and then on top of it, having a teenage pregnancy is not exactly going to win her any favors with her parents, so she has to hide it from them. Alex is trying to figure out, should he hide it from his family? Should he tell them and see if maybe they'll support them? Just all of those sort of conflicts are really what Freja's Baby is about, is just being in that very stressful situation of, let's face it, y'all, being a teenager and going to high school is hard. It's stressful all by itself. And then you throw pregnancy into the mix and oh my goodness, that's like a whole other level of crazy. So that's what Freja's Baby is about, is just all these different conflicts that Freya and Alex have to face and how they face them, whether they face them together or they face them separately, is what the story is all about. Now, another question that I get is people ask me, is this from some sort of personal experience? And the answer to that is yes and no. So for the no, I have never been pregnant, have no desire to be pregnant, not my personal experience in terms of pregnancy, motherhood, whatever. However, the bullying that Freya faces at school is something that is a personal experience of mine. The bullying that I faced was far more severe than what's presented in Freja's Baby. I definitely toned it down for the story. I actually go a step further in Frejas Baby Shattered to really show how unfair the system is when it comes to dealing with bullying. For the most part, the struggle with trying to balance all the stresses of high school and being bullied and all of that is really more from my personal experience. For any of the little drops of myself that I put in the book, that's really kind of it. That's where the buck stops. After that, this book I wrote really as an experiment for myself, because when I was attending Columbia College Chicago, one of the big things that for some reason, I don't know if it had to do with particular teachers at the time or whatever, but they were very obsessed with this idea of, they called it the real and gritty stories. Like, that's all they wanted us to write about, and I just had no interest in that. Basically, to give you an idea of what that means, a lot of the books that I was required to read in my classes had to do with like teenage runaways, living in an alley in the city and doing drugs and joining gangs and stuff like that. which again, I have zero experience with any of that kind of stuff. I was literally like the good kid growing up. Like I was totally a weirdo. Like, let's be real. I was 100% the weird kid, but I was also the good kid. Like I was the kid that like went to school, did all my homework, paid attention in class. Well, I mean, for the most part, paid attention in class. That's a whole other thing. But I did what I was supposed to. I got good grades. I did what my parents asked of me, except for when it came to being a weirdo. I was like, I'm going to be weird and you just have to deal with it. Like that was my rebellion and whatever. And not really even rebellion so much as just I wanted to be accepted for being myself. I digress. But yeah, so they just wanted us to write about topics that I, one, didn't have any interest in writing, two, had zero experience in writing, and three, I just didn't understand why the teachers had such a weird obsession with those particular topics and wanted nothing to do with it. And during that time, I was more focused on writing fantasy and historical fiction, which to this day, I have more of a focus on writing fantasy and historical fiction. However, when I was dealing with things in my marriage not going so hot, and then also subsequently dealing with my divorce, during that time period, I started to really become more experimental in my writing and started writing topics that I normally wouldn't write about. And part of the reason for that was that I just really wanted to grow as a writer, and I just really wanted to express myself in what I felt was a safe avenue. So what that means is because, as I mentioned in my other video, how I wrote Tearing Down the Wall, that book was originally based on a Hey Arnold fan fiction that I had wrote. And Frejas Baby and Frejas Baby Shattered are also both based on fan fictions, Hey Arnold fan fictions, that I previously wrote. All three of these stories used to live on fanfiction.net. They were very different, way different back then when they were posted up there. Since then, I updated them, lots of rewrites, lots of edits, all that. So they're very different books than what they used to be back then. The core of the story is still the same. And so that was the safe avenue for me, was that I was able to use these existing characters and play paper dolls with them. Just put them in completely foreign scenarios, foreign meaning foreign to me, and just kind of having that comfort of being able to experiment with these different ideas. And as I said, high school teenage pregnancy is about as foreign as it gets for my personal life experiences. So that's a big part of why I did that, was that I just really wanted to go outside of my comfort zone, but in a comfortable space with these pre-existing characters with using fan fiction. Stories became so popular that that's the reason why I took them down off of fanfiction.net and converted them into actual books and changed the characters and changed some of the aspects of the stories so that it's not really infringing on any copyrights and it reads more like a romance novel rather than a fan fiction, which I also talk about in my video about how I wrote Tearing Down the Wall. With all of that in mind, that is kind of the why and the inspiration, I guess, behind why I wrote Frejas Baby. And as I said, these books are two different storylines of the same story. So in Frejas Baby, she has the baby at the end of the story. It's kind of the whole story. It's in the title. If you couldn't guess that, spoiler, it's the title, okay? She has the baby. That's the point of the story. How exactly she gets to that point, that's the part you gotta read. That's where the spoilers are, because that's the big part of romance novels, is we all know they're going to live happily ever after. That's the point of the book. That's why we read them. That's not a surprise. How they get there, the journey, that's what matters. That's what the surprise is. So I'm not going to spoil any of that for y'all. But yes, the whole point is at the end, she has the baby and hooray, they live happily ever after and all that. Technically, it's a little bit of a happier for now sort of ending, which is, those are the two different kinds of endings for romance novels, is happily ever after and happily for now, because I'm going to continue it with the sequel, Learning to Walk. It's a little bit happier for now, whereas Frejas Baby Shattered will not have a sequel. It is definitely happily ever after. Bow's been put on the story, the end, no more. And the reason for that is because of the way that Freja's Baby Shattered ends, there isn't really any more of the story that I can give y'all. I included everything in the epilogue of that story. That's all the story there is. There isn't really much to tell beyond that, which is okay, which is perfectly okay. Whereas there's plenty more for me to be able to explore with the ending of Freja's Baby. With Freja's Baby Shattered, the alternative storyline is that Freja loses the baby. That's what Freja's Baby Shattered is all about. Is the book starts off the same as Freja's Baby. I even put in the beginning of the novel, if you have already read Freja's Baby, feel free to jump ahead to chapter 28. I've had some people ask me, well, why do you have chapters 1 through 27 the same as Freja's Baby? And the reason for that is if someone wants to buy it as its own book. If someone doesn't want to buy both Freja's Baby and Freja's Baby Shattered, if they want to just buy Freja's Baby Shattered, I want it to be where they can pick it up and just read the whole thing, and the whole thing will make sense. I don't want them to have to read Freja's Baby and Freja's Baby Shattered in order for Freja's Baby Shattered to make sense. I want both novels to be able to stand on their own. I've also had people ask me, well, if that's the case, why didn't you at least make changes to chapters 1 through 27? And honestly, the answer to that is I just didn't see a reason other than it's the same as the other book. And I can understand how that can be a wee bit disappointing because it's an alternative storyline. It's supposed to be this idea of at this one breaking point, which I can't tell you because spoilers, but at this breaking point in chapter 28 of both Freja's Baby and Freja's Baby Shattered, that is the pinnacle turning point of whether Freja has the baby or Freja loses the baby. And loses is the key verb here because she has a miscarriage and it's pretty brutal. I will be honest, it's pretty brutal. It's a very sad scene. That is the turning point, and that's why I wrote them that way. From chapter 28 beyond in Shattered, it is a completely 100% different story. And part of the reason why I decided to write Shattered is because I wanted to explore that idea. After I finished writing Freja's Baby, I don't know why, I literally just woke up one day and was like, what if during that one scene where that bad thing happens, she loses the baby? What if that happens? And I was like, let's explore that. And that's a big part of being an author, is exploring your ideas. I mean, that's the whole point of why we write. I mean, at least why I write anyway, is to just take these suppositions and turn them into realities. And that's exactly what I did, is I took this totally random supposition that I had, a very sad one, honestly. I was dealing with a lot of heavy, sad stuff during that time period of my marriage and my divorce and stuff, so that's probably why I was in a very bad, sad place. So I was like, let's write about bad, sad stuff. That's just how I decided to cope with that. I went through that supposition of what if she loses the baby. It just kind of snowballed from there of how would she deal with that and what are the repercussions of that. And Freja's Baby Shattered really deals with grief and loss and mental illness. And that's where, as I said, that Freja's Baby Shattered has far more drops of my personal experience in it than Freja's Baby, in that I myself have dealt with a lot of loss and a lot of grief, and I deal with mental illness. And just really exploring that in that book was really helpful for me, seeing how extreme things can go if your mental illness is not addressed, if you are not given the support that you need when dealing with mental illness, with dealing with grief, and when dealing with loss. And it was also very cathartic for me with the situation that I was going through, because as I said, I've also dealt with a lot of grief and loss in my life beyond my whole divorce situation. I've had a lot of deaths in my family since I was a young child. It actually got to the point where by the time I was in high school, whenever my parents would call me and tell me that they had to tell me something, they had to preface it with, nobody died. And I know that sounds really horrible and sad, but it really got to that point where we just had almost every year it was somebody died. And it was very traumatic, and it's permanently altered the way I deal with stuff. That's just what happens. It's life. And that's what I explore in Shattered, is how these traumatic events can permanently shape you, and then going from there, figuring out how to deal with that. And basically, the short answer is Freya does not deal with it. She does not deal with it, and it has absolutely catastrophic consequences. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but it is something that I typically tell people when giving them the spiel for this book, is that in response to her miscarriage, Freya has a suicide attempt. And unfortunately, something that I researched about people who try to take their own lives is sometimes things go very wrong, where even though they are able to revive the person and they're living, they're not the same anymore, depending on how they attempt. And because of the way that Freya attempted, she has brain damage. Her mental capacity is diminished, and she also has some other physical ailments because of what she does to herself as well. And the story really, at that point, becomes more focused on Alex. It becomes more focused on how he has to now deal with not only the loss of his baby, because it was going to be his baby too, but also dealing with the loss of Freya. Because even though she's still alive, she's not the same. She will never be the same ever again. And having to deal with that he's never going to be able to have that family, have that relationship that he envisioned for his life. His life has been completely turned upside down, and him having to deal with that. And yeah, there was a period of time where Alex does not deal with it. There's a lot of not dealing with it going on. And a big part of that is because that's part of my personal experience. Was when I was younger, you didn't deal with stuff like that because you didn't have the tools, you didn't have the support, you didn't know how to deal with stuff like that, so you just don't. And then when I got older and I was able to be better equipped to deal with that kind of stuff and given better support for that kind of stuff, it gets a lot better. And that's kind of what happens in this story, is that Alex is finally given better support and better tools to be able to deal with this situation. And in turn, because he is able to better deal with it himself, he's able to better help Freya deal with it. So that's kind of what Freja's Baby Shattered is about. It's about this very strange partnership, if you will, of these two individuals who come out the other side of something horrifically traumatic, and how they have to kind of put the pieces of their lives back together. And that whole idea of when you break something, even when you put it back together, it's never going to be the same. So those were kind of the rhyme and reasons behind these two incredible stories that I wrote. And I am so proud of both of them, honestly, because, as I said, they are topics that in the past I really would have never touched. These are not topics that I would have sat down and been like, oh yeah, I'm gonna write about this. And honestly, during my college years, writing about and dealing with my mental illness and the things that I've experienced was not exactly something I was all about. In fact, I was all about the opposite, which is a big part of the reason why fantasy is such a huge part of my life and a huge part of my writing experience, is the escapism. Is the not dealing with it. Basically, why would we want to deal with all this sad, scary stuff when we can run away to Rainbow Land with unicorns and fairies and dragons and fun things? Yay! Is where all of that originated. And expanding as an author and writing these different topics and writing in different genres has really helped to shape me, both as an author and as a person. And it's just really amazing how you can work through some really interesting things in your own writing. And a big part of why I do this is that it's also important to me to write about these kind of topics and to try to be more inclusive in my writing, because when I was going through my severe bullying situation when I was in junior high, I read the entire fantasy section of the library at school, and several portions of other parts of the library too. I read almost like I probably read about a third of the books in that entire library, y'all, to be perfectly honest. And reading all those books is really what got me through that time period. That was really the only thing that was keeping the glue together on my threadbare sanity during those days. And that's a big part of why I write these different topics. Is I think it's important as an author to be there for readers, is that there are a lot of different reasons why readers read books, and to be able to provide that solace, whether it's escapism through fantasy or whether it's really figuring out your problems through reading those problems through a different character in a safe space, is really what some people need. And it means a lot to me to be able to provide those kind of spaces to people. So that's my little bit of giving back sort of thing with my writing. They are available on Amazon in paperback and in ebook. And we do have a special where if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read all three: Frejas Baby, Freja Baby Shattered, and Tearing Down the Wall for free with Kindle Unlimited on Amazon. So that is an awesome deal. And I hope that y'all will check them out. They are really awesome stories. I will reiterate again, Shattered is not for the faint of heart. It is a hard story to read, but it is very worthwhile. So I want to thank y'all so much for watching today. Please be sure to give this video a like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Alrighty, y'all, take care. Bye-bye.